inside. Check, check. Testing. 1, 2. Check, check. Hey, hey. Hey, hey.
Education lecture series here at Loyola University. We're so pleased and actually honored to have our guest here this evening, Dr. Connie McKoy from University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And I know that she has some very interesting information to share with you tonight, and I'm just going to turn it over to her. So first, I might ask that I know we have a fairly large hall, and that you might feel a little more comfortable in seeing some of the things that move down a little bit, towards the front a little bit further, and we'll make that adjustment, and then we'll get the program underway.
Don't be shy. Come closer. Let me just say, I hate to do a giveaway, but maybe this will encourage some of you. There's going to be some singing going on, and it's really a lot nicer when we're all together or closer than we are currently. So if you would at least come into this middle section, you be in the last row of that section, but come on down from over there. Come on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Connie McKoy.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure for me to be a scholar in residence here at Loyola for today and tomorrow. I've had a wonderful first day, and I am really looking forward to tomorrow as well. This isn't my first visit to New Orleans. My very first visit to New Orleans was about 20 years ago when I was serving as a visiting assistant professor at the University of Southern Mississippi, like right up the road. And since I was so close to New Orleans, I had never been here before, I drove down and had a wonderful time. It was a real pleasure to get the chance to go to Cafe Du Monde and get some beignets and some coffee, and got a souvenir coffee cup that I still have. So I have a lot of wonderful memories of my visit. I actually came down again with my brother, and we got into lots of trouble. So it was really nice to be in New Orleans again, to bring back some of those memories. And I'm also really excited to be able to speak to you and talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. It's been a part of my research and part of my teaching for the last, 15, 20 years or so. And this is, in addition to being a presentation where I share information, is also going to be participatory in certain aspects. So just get ready for that, okay? I'm going to be asking you to do things. So don't be shy about them when we get to that point. There are 3 questions that form the basis for my address to you. And while the questions are posed for those currently teaching, I hope that those of you that are pre-service music education majors, and there are many of you, that you'll try to envision your future music programs and classrooms when you hear this question. By the way, are there any in-service teachers in the room? Okay, so this is all about pre-service teachers, you future teachers. And this really excites me because you all haven't started teaching yet in public schools, other than, as I understand it, your practicum. So you have the capacity to generate change in the ways that you approach your teaching. So this is very exciting to me, that you are the majority that are here in this room. But here are the questions that I want you to think about. Hang on just a minute, because you know technology. Have you, anywhere you see like music programs, say just insert future, have you ever considered whether your future music program affirms the role that culture plays in students' creative lives? Can students see their musical selves reflected in your program, or will your program implicitly send messages about what facets of music are valued and which ones aren't? How can the development of cultural competence help you make connections with the musicality in all of your students? In terms of the first question, let me start by sharing an experience from my first year teaching at Carver High School some 30 years ago. Carver was my second high school choral teaching position, and as with my previous school, the first thing I wanted to do was to become familiar with the school's alma mater. My perspective was that if any students in the school should know and be able to sing the alma mater, the choral student should. So I investigated and discovered that the melody of the Carver High School alma mater was based on the melody of the Canadian national anthem. Now, as it happened, I had a book at home with a standard SATB homophonic hymn-like arrangement of the anthem, so I decided to teach that arrangement to my students. So to give you an idea of what it sounded like, I'm going to play an excerpt of the Carver alma mater. Now, I used Sibelius to create the score, so the playback reflects the sounds of the voices but not the text. The text corresponds to, the text in the excerpt that you're going to hear corresponds with these words. O Carver School, the best in all the land, we will uphold the ideals for which you stand. And I will tell you at the outset that after you listen to it, I'm going to challenge you to sing it. So as you listen and watch the notation, choose the part that you think you'd like to sing, because after you hear it, we're going to try it. Are you ready? Want to hear it again? All right, we'll listen to it one more time, and then you're going to sing it. Here we go. Okay, remember the words are, O Carver School, the best in all the land, we will uphold the ideals for which you stand. O soprano, O alto, O tenor, O bass. 1, 2, try it, and. Really nice. I like that. Y'all handled that really well, especially knowing that you weren't expecting to have to sing it. So, I started teaching this version of the song to the choir, and one of my students came up to me one day and asked me if I would consider writing a more upbeat version of the song, like the music teacher did in Lean On Me. Now, that's a fairly old film, so some of you who may be closer to my age might remember it, but a lot of you may not, or maybe you haven't seen. But at any rate, It was a film that starred a young Morgan Freeman and was based on the true story of Joe Clark, an African-American educator in New Jersey who had a very unorthodox approach to teaching and to educational administration. He was assigned to Eastside High School, an institution whose students were struggling academically and also in other ways. Joe Clark decided that one of the ways he would start to turn the school around was to instill pride in the students for the school. But when he first asked them in an assembly to sing the school song, which, by the way, was also pretty conventional and homophonic, the results were less than pitiful. He declared then and there that every student in the school should learn the alma mater and be prepared to sing it on command at any time. And he ended up firing the music teacher for insubordination because she told him that their upcoming choral festival performance was more important to her at that time than forcing them to sing the song on demand. Now, regardless of how we might feel about that particular incident, the part of the story that relates to what my student had asked of me had to do with the fact that the fired music teacher's assistant, Mrs. Powers, took over the choir. The clip I'd like to share with you is where Mr. Clark confronts some young men who he suspected were smoking in the boys' bathroom, only to be told by them that they were practicing the alma mater that Mrs. Powers had taught them. Mr. Clark was not convinced, and so he demanded that the young men sing it for them. Sing it for him.
Fair East Side, Fair East Side, by thy side will stand and always praise thy name. Praise thy name, praise thy name. To ever, yeah. Lend a hearts and hands to help increase thy fame. Ooh, Lord, the honor, yeah, of old East Side, cause forth our loyalty. Loyalty. So cheap.
All right. Who taught you that? Answer me. I know you didn't do it yourselves. Sams,
What?
who taught you this song? Speak up!
Mrs. Powers.
Mrs. Powers, eh? Come with me, all of you.
No. Now you must remember, we need intonation, phonation, accuracy, and pitch. Now this is your note.
Mrs. Powers,
Yes, sir.
these hoodlums have told me something I can't believe. Are you the one who changed the school song like that?
Mrs. Powers.
Let her answer.
Well, sir, the children thought the song was a bit boring.
Boring, huh? Mrs. Powers, I have never heard a school song like that. And I certainly never authorized you to change it. Did I? Did I?
No, you didn't.
I want everyone in this school to learn that song in English and Spanish immediately. Take a bow, Mrs. Powers. You've rewritten our alma mater.
So that's what my students were asking me to do. And I thought, well, wasn't sure I could, but I was willing to take on the challenge. So I went home, and over the weekend, I rearranged the alma mater. And I went in and nervously presented it to my students. And here is an excerpt. It's the same excerpt that you just sang, but my rearrangement. So give a listen. So when they try, oh, thank you, thank you. My kids actually loved it. And, you know, my heart was beating fast because I thought, especially as a new teacher, if I screw this up, it's going to take me weeks to get them back on board with me. So, you know, it was really a great thing to know that they enjoyed this particular version, which I'm going to ask you to try. So I'm going to play it one more time. Pick your part, and let's see what happens. Now, keep in mind now, this is 12/8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Cover school, so on and so forth. Try it. Listen to it one more time, and then you're going to try it. Just to help you out, I'm going to play it. You just sing it with the recording, with the words, though. Sorry that I can't tell you when it's going to start. It's going to start, so just jump in with it. The best in all bass. Song, that version of the alma mater became so popular, we sang it at every assembly and at every opportunity that we had to perform it. It became the favorite version of the alma mater. And I think that this was one of the, I didn't know it at the time, but it was one of the opportunities I had to take a student's idea and make it into a reality, and really was the beginning of what I later came to understand to be culturally responsive teaching. It was culturally responsive because my students wanted a version that sounded more like what they were accustomed to hearing, many of them were accustomed to hearing, and also because they kind of related what I was doing to what was happening in this film. And so taking their suggestion to heart was one of the ways in which I was able to say to them, I'm a new teacher, but I'm willing and I guess able to take some of your suggestions and incorporate them into what I was doing. And it's this particular event really set the tone for me with my students ever after that. And by the way, my students kind of took this and ran with it. They started to improvise on top of the song. And there were a few kids who were really great soloists in their church choirs, and they just ran with some of the lines and the melodic lines, and then it just took off with it. And every year, it was funny, you know, those of you who have ever participated in a gospel choir understand that there are some songs that are known by the person who sings the solo in the song. So it's like, yeah, let's do Clarissa's song. Well, Clarissa's song might have an actual title, but it's Clarissa's song because Clarice sings the solo. So when it would go from class to class, one class would graduate, there was always a discussion. I think the young lady's name who had done the most of the solo improvisation, her name was Anita. And so they said, well, who's going to sing Anita's part? Because Anita had graduated, right? But it was Anita's part, right? So that's how it was known among the students. So every year it was like, who's going to take Anita's part this year, you know? So it to me was a great way of finding out that the kids had sort of taken ownership of that particular song which is another aspect of culturally responsive teaching. So now I have said the term culturally responsive teaching twice, so let me take a moment and kind of share a little bit of information about that, since that's a basis for a lot of what I'm sharing with you tonight. Culturally responsive teaching is really the midpoint of a timeline of development that began in 1995 with culturally relevant pedagogy. And this was a theory developed by the woman that you see here, Gloria Ladson-Billings, back in 1995, so that was a ways away, and she's the first person to develop a theory behind culturally responsive teaching, which was a way of teaching that valued the knowledge base that students brought to the classroom. Time won't allow me to go into it in as much depth as I would like, but I think it's sufficient for you to know that it is what we call an asset-based pedagogy. And by that, it is meant that up to the point where Dr. Ladson-Billings had developed her theory, when teachers were trying to address academic gaps that they saw between white students and students of color, or middle-class students and students of low socioeconomic background, however that might have presented itself, they usually thought of it in terms of deficits that students had. And culturally relevant pedagogy pushed back against that and said, look, all students come to you with information. And that information needs to be valued because it's based on the cultural knowledge base that they bring to the classroom. So instead of talking about what students don't have, you should be mining for what they do have and learning to understand it and value it and apply it in what you do as teachers. In the timeline, next came Geneva Gay with culturally responsive teaching. So the ideas were fairly similar, whereas Dr. Ladson-Billings was looking at changing teacher attitudes about how they approach working with students. Dr. Gay is talking about providing strategies and ways for teachers to understand about the things they should be doing in their teaching to address the fact that students come to us with knowledge and that we should be using that knowledge to teach them more effectively. Currently, you may have heard the term culturally sustaining pedagogy, and this has been developed by Dr. Django Paris, and he's taken the ideas of Gloria Ladson-Billings and has extended them because he feels like the way Dr. Ladson-Billings and Dr. Gay's ideas have been implemented in the classroom, they don't sustain the knowledge that the students have. It's often used to sort of pique their interest, but then when they get the students going, they kind of fall back on traditional pedagogies. And so what he's saying, he's challenging teachers to, once they discover the knowledge base that students have regarding the subject matter, to take that and stick with it and to sustain it when they are working with students. My own research has focused primarily on some of the work and ideas of Geneva Gay, and so a lot of what I'll be sharing with you is sort of based on her ideas. And those ideas have served me in my own research and also in terms of applications to music education, because I found out about all of this when I was doing research on my dissertation, which originally focused on multicultural music education. And so I started reading the literature in general education on multicultural education. And man, did I see a difference between how the general education teachers were talking about this and how we were talking about it in music ed. In music ed, we were talking about multicultural music education only in terms of the content, only in terms of rep. So the idea was, let's expand the repertoire that we teach in our classrooms beyond the Western European canon. But that's not how they were talking about it in general education. In general education, they were looking at the kids in the classroom. And what do those kids bring to the classroom? What information and knowledge do they bring that we need to be paying attention to? And so I thought, gee, when I think about the intimate relationship between music and culture, why aren't we talking about it in this way in music education? So that's how I got started with this research, and that's why it really is sort of critical to me in the days and times that we live in, that we begin to think about not only diversifying the kinds of music that we expose students to, but also thinking about approaching our students with a mindset toward valuing the ideas and the knowledge that they bring to the classroom. So I'm going to jump ahead because I've basically told you some of this already. Music and culture are intimately connected. Another thing that's really important to keep in mind is that teaching music without considering the various cultural meanings it can hold for students is to overlook an important point of reference from which new knowledge can be constructed and program relevance can be maintained or reestablished. Nearly 30 years ago, music education scholar David Elliott observed that, and I'm paraphrasing here, if it's accurate to say that music education functions as culture as much as it functions independently in a culture, then a dynamic music curriculum that's responsive to culture offers the opportunity to develop students' appreciation and behaviors relative to the personhood of the human beings who generate various cultures, as well as the specific culturally informed facets of music that they and we construct, maintain, and apply. Yeah, Dr. McKoy, what does that mean? Well, what it means is when you learn about the music of a people, you learn a bit about the people themselves. It also means that when you devalue the music of the people, it can be similar to devaluing the people themselves. And we don't often think about it in those terms, but this is what David Elliott is talking about in the quote that I just shared. He's suggesting that engagement with music is as much about the people who create it as it is about the form and function of the music itself. And this consideration leads me to the second question. Can students see their musical selves reflected in your program, or does your program, or will your program implicitly send messages about what genres of music are valued and which ones aren't? I'm going to share a slide with you, and I'm going to ask you to think about how you think most people will fill in the blanks as they read it. What do you think, how do you think they would fill in that first one? He's a great artist, but he's no, could be. Any other thoughts? No Rembrandt. Anybody else? Okay, we'll go to the next one. Listening to blank makes your baby smarter. I'm hearing blah, blah, blah. Somebody be bold. Yell out. Yeah. All right. Cool. To be a great dancer, you must have a strong basis in what? Ballet. Thanks, you brave soul. Thank you. Great literature begins with blank. Thank you. Well, here's how most people respond. Now, if you notice, the answers that appear here indicate that dominant understandings of the arts and what it means to be an artist in the broad sense of the word are profoundly shaped and influenced by Eurocentric assumptions regarding culture and cultural production. Schools tend to acknowledge and assign value to specific funds of knowledge as opposed to others. This contributes to implicit biases we may hold not only in terms of what musical styles and genres we value, but how we may view the musical capacities of the students that we teach. Implicit bias, as you see defined here, involves the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. And that part is really important. So I want to take you through a quick exercise that illustrates how implicit bias functions. This is another audience participation, so get ready. I'm going to read some prompts for you, and at the end of each one, I want you to say out loud the first word that comes to mind. Are you ready? Well, whether you're ready or not, I'm going, okay? If I'm a comedian, I'm likely to tell you, I don't like Pepsi, I like. Where there's fire, there's likely to be. The white part of an egg is called a. Is it? The white part of an egg is called an egg white. But why did you say yolk? I'll take any hand that comes up, and I'll, if I can understand what they're saying, I'll repeat it here at the mic. Why did you say yolk? Or why did most everybody say yolk? They rhyme. So you all had picked up a pattern in the responses that you gave. And you went, oh, I got this. And so when I came to that last one, you weren't even thinking about it. Say, it's going to rhyme, so I'm just going to listen to it halfway, and bam, out comes yolk. And then it's, for many of you, as soon as you said it, you went, oh, that's not what it is. Well, this is kind of superficial, but it is sort of the way implicit bias works in our brains. Our brains take shortcuts. So it causes us to form associations automatically without thinking about them. Now, sometimes these associations and evaluations are good, like the positive feelings we get when we see someone we care about or friends that we like. But sometimes the associations or evaluations are negative, like stereotypes related to someone's identity or affiliation. In each case, our brain accesses these evaluations and associations without our being aware of it, unconscious. And that's why knowing about implicit bias functions, how it functions, is the first step toward correcting the negative associations and evaluations we are prone to make. As they say, the first step in changing a behavior is being aware of it, particularly if it operates on an unconscious level. Addressing implicit bias on an individual level, though, isn't enough. It's important to be aware of how systemic implicit bias serves to marginalize and exclude. It may or may not surprise you to know that implicit bias plays out in our education system in ways that are detrimental to many students. It's reflected in lots of ways. Think for a minute about the implication of some of the terminology commonly used in education today. For example, how much does implicit bias influence what we infer when we hear the term Title I school? Do we think of a school that receives federal funding because it has a high concentration of students of low socioeconomic status? Because that's what a Title I school is. Or do we make negative associations about the students in such schools? There are similar issues with the term at risk. This is Victor Rios. He's an award-winning professor, author, and he'll tell you a former high school dropout, and he will also tell you he was a former juvenile delinquent. He believes that we should eliminate the term at risk because it stigmatizes students by framing teachers' perceptions toward the expectation of failure, at risk of failure, a decidedly deficit-based approach. Rios has challenged educators to replace the term at risk with at promise. In other words, instead of being at risk of failure, they are at promise for success. Just think about it. That one little shift of perception can make a big difference for students. It allows teachers to recognize the potential inherent in all students and indeed a bill to remove references to at-risk youth and replace the term with at-promise youth in California's Education Code and Penal Code was approved by California Governor Gavin Newsom in October of 2019. In thinking about how implicit bias could influence our own teaching, We should consider not just how it may impact the way we view our students, but the extent to which the content we develop for our programs may be sending implicit messages about which students our programs include and which students they exclude, whether unintentionally or not. When I ask in the title of this address if students can see themselves in your music programs, I'm asking not only whether they can imagine themselves involved with your programs, but also whether those programs reflect the cultural variety of music. Can students see your program as a place where their own musical capacities are valued and will be nurtured? As I ask you to consider the final question, how can the development of cultural competence help you make connections with the musicality in all your students? Let me start with a few statistics. In 2014, Ken Elpis noted that although the percentage of students who choose to take at least one music class at the high school level had remained steady at approximately 34% for the previous 30 years, the National Endowment for the Arts reported that United States African American and Hispanic students' access to music study is significantly limited as compared to their white peers, and participation by English language learners has been declining. Fallout from the implementation of policies associated with the No Child Left Behind legislation of 2001 might account for some of this decline. In a 2019 published study, Ken Elpis and Carlos Abril investigated 25,210 high school students to determine the demographic characteristics of the students who enrolled in high school music programs. They looked at such demographic factors as birth-assigned sex, race or ethnicity, socioeconomic status, among others. The statistical analysis showed that the demographic of students enrolled in instrumental ensembles was significantly different than that of the general student population for every characteristic except birth-assigned sex. And while the general student population was varied regarding the demographic characteristics being studied, the demographic characteristics of the instrumental ensembles were more similar. Conversely, choir students did not differ significantly from the general student population for any characteristic except for birth-assigned sex. The choir tended to have more females than males. Regarding socioeconomic status, when looking at each type of ensemble separately, socioeconomic status only predicted enrollment among band students. That is, a higher percentage of students in band were of a higher socioeconomic status than the general student population. The study also revealed that in terms of non-ensemble courses, only 3% of students enrolled in guitar class, 3% enrolled in piano, and less than 1% were in a music technology course. Regarding these and other results of their study, this is what Elpis and Abril had to say. And I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I'm going to read it. The problem may not be in increasing the number of students in music courses, which is commonly heard in professional rhetoric. The problem may not be that so much as ensuring that music courses are attracting a representative and wide cross-section of the general student population. While access to music instruction for all students is of great concern, we should also be concerned about students disengaging with music classes in middle and high school because they don't reflect the students' personal musical experiences that are often culturally informed. Arguably, this disengagement should be of greater concern to us because a possible rationale for starting a music education program in a school that currently doesn't have one could be the benefits afforded in schools where all students not only have access to music education programs, but where the majority of students engage with these programs and thrive as a consequence. We know that students who bring a different knowledge base to the learning process are often seen as lacking. They're viewed through a lens that emphasizes their deficits, or so-called deficits, when measured by middle-class standards. This is French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. He had a theory of cultural capital That might be one explanation for why deficit thinking regarding students of specific racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic status is so persistent in United States education. Bourdieu's theory states that the educational system privileges middle-class students because they possess knowledge and skills that are valued by teachers. Most students are very perceptive about how they view teachers, and they quickly recognize where teachers value their knowledge and skills and which teachers don't. When what they know and can do is not valued in education, students resist schooling and engage in what Herbert Cole calls not learning. This is what Herbert Cole says, in describing what not learning is. Not learning tends to take place when someone must deal with unavoidable challenges to their personal and family loyalties, integrity, and identity. In such situations, there are forced choices and no apparent middle ground. To agree to learn from a stranger who does not respect your integrity causes a major loss of self. The only alternative is to not learn and reject the stranger's world. It's important to consider that students who don't see themselves as being adept at learning what is required by the educational system can become disengaged in a process that continually fails to value their culturally specific knowledge base. Unfortunately, when the resources that students bring to the classroom are overlooked, their access to the knowledge construction process is denied. But when students are in educational settings where they can associate new content with their own experiences and where they have the opportunity to explore and experiment, they are likely to become active participants who can find meaning in their own learning. However, and there always seems to be a however, for far too many students, For far too many students, the message that they're receiving from us as music educators is that the genres of music that interest them and their ways of knowing and engaging with those genres have no place in the music curriculum. Christopher Small described a hidden logical chain in some music practice that I think can serve as an example of what I'm talking about. And keep in mind, in a logical chain, the conclusion that you come to is accurate only if the premises that precede it are accurate. So let's take a look at his logical chain. This is what it says. Our music, which may be any of those that are in the highlighted area, our music is the only real music. You don't like or aren't proficient in or aren't interested in our music. Therefore, you're not musical. Now, I think you can see the fallacy in that conclusion is based on the fact that there's a fallacy in the premises. The music, there's more kinds of music than the music that's listed in those parentheses. And so we would be making a huge error to assume that if students don't like those types of music, which are the types of music we typically find in music programs, it would be a huge error to assume that if they don't like those types of music, that they're not musical. But that happens a lot more than we want to admit in many of our music programs. Many, if not most of us, tend to believe that the musical canon of knowledge that served as the foundation of our own educational experience is the exclusive source of all authoritative knowledge in music. The idea that there can be multiple and equally viable perspectives regarding a body of knowledge is a comparatively new one. As Geneva Gay observed, the emancipatory benefit of culturally responsive teaching's inclusive approach to the knowledge base is that it enables learners to find their own voices as they explore issues from multiple perspectives and begin to feel the freedom to be ethnically expressive instead of trying to cover up their cultural inclinations so as not to make other people uncomfortable or in order to blend into the mainstream. We might ask ourselves, does participation or will participation in your music program require that students subdue or erase a part of themselves culturally in order to excel? I'm going to let that sit with you for a minute. Culturally responsive teaching has developed as a result of educators looking for ways to provide equitable educational experiences for all children. It requires teachers to develop strategies designed to connect schooling to the lives and learning styles of culturally diverse student populations. Culturally responsive teaching celebrates diversity and sees it as an instructional resource rather than a problem. It teaches the whole child and integrates all facets of the learning process and the instructional environment. It enables students to develop a sense of self-efficacy, both within and beyond school. It challenges the educational status quo for the benefit of all learners, and it acknowledges the importance of including multiple perspectives in the quest to examine and explore the truths of a discipline. In our book on culturally responsive teaching and music education, my colleague Vicki Lind and I identified 4 principles which, when implemented thoughtfully, can help you begin to develop more culturally responsive or sustaining teaching practices and consequently more meaningful interactions with students. So I'm going to share these 4 principles with you, after which you'll get a chance to hear or see a video from teachers who actually apply these principles in their own teaching. These principles include knowing yourself, knowing your students, creating a supportive classroom environment, and making program and curricular decisions that are responsive to culture. Knowing ourselves involves understanding how our cultural conditioning affects our beliefs, our values, and attitudes, and in turn, understanding how those beliefs, values, and attitudes affect what and how we teach and how we view our students. I addressed some of these aspects previously in my discussion about implicit bias. The importance of knowing our students may seem obvious, but it goes beyond understanding them academically. We need to understand that our students come to us with information about music, much of which is culturally informed. Too often, we treat our students as if they're blank slates who don't know anything about music until we inscribe it on their brain pans. All of us, including our students, are a reflection of the experience we have within and beyond the music classroom. We can't really begin to know our students if we only focus on who they are as students. We also need to actually ask students about their goals and aspirations in music, and not just assume they want to follow traditional professional paths. All of us strive to provide a supportive classroom environment for our students, or we want to. But culturally responsive teaching asks us to consider both the emotional and physical needs of students. An important means of building relationships of mutual trust and respect between ourselves and our students is to be willing to learn from our students and to validate their thoughts and ideas. I learned the truth of that principle in the scenario I shared with you about my first year at Carver High School. When students know you care about what they care about, they're more willing to trust you when you ask them to engage with content that may be unfamiliar to them. Starting with what students already know and appreciate is also an excellent way to develop the foundation for the construction of new knowledge. In terms of culturally responsive teaching, making program and curricular choices that are responsive to culture often means challenging the dominant paradigms associated with music education and encouraging our students to do the same. It also involves questioning long-held assumptions about materials that have been traditionally accepted. In our profession, there's been an increasing focus on the origins of songs and whether their use perpetuates cultural stereotypes. For example, teachers are reconsidering how or whether they want to use songs such as Jimmy Crack Corn, also known as Blue Tail Fly, which had their origins in blackface minstrelsy, and with a verse that says, "When I was young, I used to wait on master and hand him his plate, and pass the bottle when he got dry, and brush away the blue tail fly." I'd like to conclude by sharing some videos of several teachers that my colleague Vicki Lynn and I interviewed who will explain to you why they think culturally responsive teaching is important. The first teacher is a string music educator from North Carolina who teaches in a middle school and high school. The second teacher is a general music teacher who teaches in New York City. The third is a general music teacher from Washington State. The final three teachers are all from North Carolina. One is a former high school band director who now teaches in a North Carolina community college. The next is a string music educator who teaches in an elementary arts magnet school. And finally, you'll hear from another elementary general music teacher.
I think the biggest thing for me, because I teach music, is that you can't talk about music without talking about culture. Even if you think you're not, you are.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of our responsibility as teachers to realize that we're going to be teaching in a culturally relevant way or irrelevant way, no matter what we're doing. So we need to make the effort to be relevant to the actual students that we have.
Like as a kid, I would bring like fried fish and rice to school, and then the kids would be like, "Oh, that's weird," and then I would change it, and I would I would try to become what the social norm is for that area and maybe like America. So as a teacher now, how I feel teaching in a culturally responsive way is important to me is that it keeps the integrity of what makes, in my opinion, America, America. We all come from different places, different backgrounds, different whatever, and we say that we celebrate that, and we should. So that should not be, so we shouldn't, be bringing stigmas and making people feel uncomfortable with sharing what makes their family unique or what, they like or anything like that.
My grandfather immigrated from Chile when he was a young man and encountered a lot of racism and xenophobia, but loved music and persisted in that and shared that with me and my sisters. And his wife, my grandmother, was a language professor, and so her home was always full of people from everywhere. And so it was expected as part of my childhood that we would be listening and learning and valuing people's stories, even if they were not the same as our own, especially if they were not the same as our own. And then as I got older, I realized how much of my grandfather's Latinidad, we say, was in how I experienced music and like how I move and how I talk and just kind of the social norms I expect as a Latina in terms of like social knowledge construction, touch in a classroom, expectations for warmth. There are just so many compelling stories of why it matters for how a kid feels in class and then how they take that home with them and how that impacts how they grow up. And so for me, my ethnically and culturally and linguistically diverse students, they're top priority, not just because of my ideals, but because of my family story.
It's because it's best educational practice. It is how we reach all of our students. And that's not going away, that's increasing. All we have to do is look at the current demographics of the United States and the changing demographics of the United States to realize that culturally responsive teaching is going to become more and more important instead of less important. So if I had to say one thing, it's just good teaching.
Well, for me, after years of teaching, I don't even think it's an option. I think it's, you must be able to do this. If you're going to really connect with your children, especially what we do in here in violin. So I have to get everybody to buy in with me. And the only way I can do that, number one, is to know that they can trust me, that I have their best welfare in mind. to be consistent. And that whole relational piece is just huge. But if I can connect with them relationally, I can get them to do what we need to do. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But the children, it's just a commitment, a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And they respond to that very well.
Because it shows me what the children really need to know. Not what I think they need to know per se, or just what I think they need to know, but it really and truly shows me what they need to know, what is relevant, so that when I want to talk to them about these dead composers on my door, they know that we've already made a connection, that I appreciate what they already can bring, and they're willing to listen a little bit more about Mozart and Bach and those people that they can't relate to if I just said, now we're going to listen to the Minuet in G by J.S. Bach and play it for them and say, isn't that nice? No. So, you know, just understanding that they come with something. They come with something. And I need to identify as best I can what they have so we can meet in the middle and continue to learn together.
I'd like to leave you with quotes by two people who I believe understand the challenges and rewards of committing to not doing what we've always done. The first quote is by the poet, novelist, and civil rights activist and intellectual James Baldwin, who said, and I hope you don't mind if I read this aloud, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And this last quote is by renowned anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And for many students, their world will be changed by the thoughtful and committed work of future teachers like you, who believe that music education programs should seek to be the place where students can see the cultural facets of their musical identities and capacities reflected, nurtured, and valued in all of their infinite cultural variety through your music programs. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have at this point. Don't know if you have any, but I'm happy to take any. Where can we get your book? My book should be, mine and Vicki Lynn's book should be available through Routledge or Amazon.com beginning October 28th. We're excited about it. It's the second edition of the book. We had a previous one, and we've added some things in it. We felt like because of how COVID has impacted teaching and learning, and because of the social protests of the summer of 2020, all of which have impacted students, and teachers are working with students through those issues, that it was imperative that we have a second edition for that. I got my preview copy already, so I'm excited about that. I'm planning to send those to the teachers who were kind enough to allow us to quote them in the parts of the book. Because that's a part of the book we're really excited about. The first part gives you like theory and history and stuff that indicates why this approach developed and how it developed. But the second part is where teachers talk about their use of it, because a lot of times you can hear folks talk about something theoretically, and you know, people want to know, well, what happens when the rubber meets the road? So I think it was important for us to get the voice of teachers, people who are, you know, doing the work, so that others who might be interested in teaching through this lens can understand that it can be done. It's not pie in the sky. There are teachers that are actually employing it. So we were able to locate teachers from across the country. We added an administrator. We didn't have an administrator in the last book. And we also have a couple of pre-service teachers like you. We included their voices as well. Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm wondering if I'm going to make it.
Yes.
So as I understand, culturally responsive teaching is at heart like understanding the student in their terms in their world.
Yes.
There's a part of the education that is, at least the way we've structured, music and music theory, that's always not going to be a part of their world, right? It's always going to be, as much as we try to adapt to their comfort zone, we are always going to have to take these students away from it in order for them to learn certain traits that are required by, the marketplace or, career in music. I guess my question is, how does, culturally responsive teaching translate to a marketplace that may not be culturally responsive? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Are there skills that these students are going to be lacking in when they reach? You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think there's a couple of things I think, as you said. Did you all hear his question? Was it clear for you? Part of that depends on what the marketplace is, how you identify the marketplace. So if you're planning, for so long, the marketplace, as far as music education was concerned, was either to develop more music educators or to develop performers who were going to be on the classical stage, in orchestras, in opera houses. That's not it anymore. It is much more varied. And what we're hearing from our students is, for those for whom that's their goal, they're going to get there. That now they may have a struggle because, for good or for bad, orchestras are closing down, opera house closing down, fewer and fewer. But what we're hearing from our students is, we see people applying their art forms in lots of different ways. We want to know how to be able to be flexible in our musicianship so that we can take advantage of a marketplace that is multifaceted. So I would argue that how that question is answered depends on how you see the marketplace. Is it the same as it was 50 years ago? Or is it now multifaceted, such that our old or traditional ways of preparing students aren't cutting it the way it should be? Wonderful question. Thank you for that. Other questions? Yes.
So, I remember you talked about bringing the curriculum more towards the student, if I'm not mistaken. So I was wondering how you would go about, what your thought process would be of taking that to students, as was said in the demographics, students who don't have English as their first language. There might be that barrier there.
It's interesting you should say that, because I was just talking to one of my methods classes the other day. There's a video and a class text that they're using, and they're talking about music and how it's one of the few, music and other arts areas are one of the few areas where being able to speak English is not necessary. It's helpful if you learn another language yourself, but of course you can have a variety of languages in your classrooms. But one of the things that we know is true across cultures is that everybody makes music. We don't know of any culture that doesn't organize sound. So it's a matter of, okay, if you're teaching a song and the song's in English, do you have to sing it in English? No. You can teach the song on a neutral syllable. If the student can access it that way, that's the beginning. You can help students learn things using graphics, pictures, right? We often think about words as being the only way to communicate, but they're not. You can use pictures to communicate. A lot of it, yes, a lot of that responsibility falls on your shoulders, but you're a teacher, and that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to find the ways to make accessing music learning more effective and easier for your students. And so if you have a student who doesn't speak English, there's a couple of things that can happen. If you know, some of the things that I mentioned you could do, if the goal, educational goal, is that they do learn to speak English, then of course you're going to do some things that are in English to help them acquire. But you're not going to steadfastly refuse to do things in different ways that are going to present a barrier. It was like I was saying this morning, I don't want to be the one that sets up a barrier to somebody's learning. It's not going to be me. If I do anything, I'm going to be the one that breaks down the barrier for the student. At least that's my goal. And sometimes, it's not always successful or as successful as you want it, but I'm about, let's try, right? And there are always going to be other people you can consult that can help you, right? If somebody speaks, if you have teachers if in a high school particularly, if you have teachers who teach other languages that are present in your classroom, go talk to them. How do I say this? Find some key phrases so that you can communicate with your students. I happened to learn Spanish when I was coming through school. And I was teaching in an elementary school. And I had a new student in my classroom, and this was like first grade class. I was teaching general music. And it was a young child who only spoke Spanish. And it was the child's first day, and I was watching the child, and the child was like, you could imagine any child plopped down in a school, nobody speaks their language, and they're just trying to survive. So I came in the classroom, and the teacher made me aware of who the child was. So I started giving directions and repeating them in Spanish. And that child's eyes got so big because for the first time that day, there was somebody who said something that she understood. And I had my fingers crossed because I said, yeah, it's been a while since I spoke Spanish. I hope I'm saying the right thing. But that one connection, her eyes followed me the whole time. And there were times when I didn't necessarily know the exact word, but I would use a phrase sort of like, watch me, and I would do some things, and she would do them, right? And so that told me that, you know, it is worthwhile to take that effort. Now, for me at that particular point, it's like I knew the Spanish, so I was lucky. But if it was a child who only spoke Korean, you better bet I would be getting online, going to Google Translate, learning me some Korean so that I can communicate with that student. Or even to the point where I might see if the student knew some Korean songs. But you have to be very careful because you don't want to make a student be different, right? I might talk to that child one-on-one, see if I could communicate well enough, find out if the child, or maybe even sing a song that I knew that was Korean and find out if they know the song, right? And maybe they would appreciate me doing the song with the class. Or maybe that child would say to me, you're saying that word wrong. Or tell me in Korean that word is this way, right? So it's a two-way process. We learn from our students, just like they learn from us. There's so many rich experiences you can have if you're willing to put in the effort and time with students whose knowledge base is different from yours. I hope that answered your question. Other questions? Let me just say this. I'm excited for you. I'm always excited when I'm in front of future teachers, because even though I'm older, I still remember what it was like before I started teaching. I still remember what it was like my first year teaching. I was so excited. And believe it or not, I am still excited. Every time a new school year comes around, I have trouble sleeping the night before because I'm so excited. People think I'm crazy. So I'm excited for you and the journey that you're on. I truly hope that something that I said tonight struck a nerve or resonated with you, because I truly believe that teaching music from a culturally responsive lens can make all the difference in the world in terms of our students being able to define who they are musically, right? Because that's what we want. Part of what we want as music teachers is to enable our students to be able to define who they are musically. And we help to facilitate that, right? So thank you again for your time and your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And we'll conclude our program for tonight, and have a great evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.